You know, I had a great sense when I was living in this village about even, you know, Chinese farmers who, you look at them and they look kind of uncultured, but having a rather sophisticated view about the society around them and a respect for the fact that they are in a situation that is beyond their control. I mean, one of the you know, important events when I was in this village was one afternoon over the loudspeakers. There was an announcement that Liu Shaoqi, you know, the great villain of the Cultural Revolution, had been rehabilitated, and there wasn't rejoicing. There wasn't. It was, you know, it was another turn of the clock. It was another change in the external environment over which they had no control that they would adapt to, and it's probably you know, adapting for the better. But you know, you don't want to be too joyous about these things because you never know. You never know if it's going to stick. You never know what's going to change. I mean, and I think the Chinese share. I mean, I think a lot in common with the English. Have this great sense of irony and theater. I mean, theater is a very important part of Chinese life. But I think it's something that is very deep in the culture. And I began to understand the sort of the intelligent world of, and I spent a lot of time talking to farmers in China, and you begin to understand sort of the intelligent understanding of social structure by ordinary Chinese, and how they are, you know, how they interact, you know, with people in different situations.
I was thinking,
oh, go ahead.
the Cultural Revolution was really one of the great divides of Chinese history. And we were there when people were just, whose lives had been shattered by people who had been sent down to the countryside. And then, on the other side of the picture, some of our interpreters were people who had been Red Guards and had done, you know, some indescribable things to the older people.
Can you all hear?
And
Tom, pick up the mic.
oh, sorry. Had done indescribable things to older people, and now in that sort of post-cultural revolution period, there was everyone knew exactly what he had done during the Cultural Revolution and what his next door neighbor had done and what his close friends had done. But nobody was willing to talk openly about it because you never knew what sort of demons would be unleashed. And I think it's left the Chinese people collectively, now this is sort of really trying to come to big conclusions, with a sense that they don't want to go through. It was such a traumatic experience, and it touched so many people, both in the countryside and in the city, that they don't want to go through that kind of experience again. And that, I think, is what has helped to keep China quiet, despite sort of, you know, occasional, despite, for instance, the Tiananmen incident, which was a great, great shock to the Chinese people. And I think it now you have a younger generation coming up who are the result of that, who are also the result of Deng Xiaoping's one-child per family policy, where, you know, you have no brother, or very few people have brothers and sisters, and it's a new China that's taking shape, but very much affected by what had gone before.
Well, I have to start to say, let me start with my first visual encounter with China, which was 1954 when I arrived in Hong Kong, which of course was then not part of China, and when I stayed with Betty Lou, got married. And went out to the border. One of the, I think, first things that Doak did was to take me out to the border on the new territories with China. And it was like looking, I won't say into a concentration camp, but there were heavy fences and wires and very forbidding looking soldiers on the other side. And it was bleak on the other side, and you felt that you were looking into a never land that was certainly very unwelcoming. Yes, I did grow up in the Middle East. Unlike everybody here, everybody who's talked here so far, I've never lived in China. I've lived in Hong Kong, I've never lived in China. I've traveled to China many times, and really kind of in three different ways. My first trip was in 1978. And this was a result of getting together with some friends of mine, some women friends of mine who had some relationship with China. Some had lived in China, and some had focused on China in other ways. And we got together and decided we would form a women's group to go to China, and we got permission to do that. I had just received myself a master's degree in women's studies, so I was very focused on that, and we were very much focused on, we called ourselves the American Women's China Study Group. And so our 3 weeks in China were very much focused on meeting with women and talking about issues that related to women. One of the most interesting of those in many ways was meeting with Deng Ying Chao and Tang Ka-ching and having a long conversation with them, which was so, I think, amazingly given in 1978, was an amazing, candid discussion. And I remember particularly Deng Ying Chao, who really spoke with who was the widow of Zhou Enlai, great passion and about the plight of Chinese women and all that needed to be done to improve their lives. During the 1980s, all my trips, and really up until the middle 90s, all my trips to China were with Doak. So I was kind of an appendage traveling around with him from place to place and listening in, and as any of you who know Doak and have read his books and so forth, he spent an enormous amount of time interviewing governors, mayors, factory people, people in not so much communes in those days. And so I always was the listener and the person who kind of tried to judge what was going on, but not really a participant in any of these conversations. One very fortunate thing that way of conducting all of these interviews was there always was an interpreter. Doak's Chinese was very good, and obviously the people with whom he was speaking did not know English, but their Chinese obviously was excellent. But the role of the interpreter, or the benefit of having an interpreter was that there was always a pause between question and answer, and that gave Doak a time to think and the respondent a time to think, and for me to hear something in English. So, so we traveled to many parts of China, and I think one of the things that struck me, of course, this during the 1980s, this again was a period of China beginning, kind of a rebirth, certainly after the Cultural Revolution years, and visiting factories who were terribly proud of what they were producing. I can remember stopping outside of Nanjing. We were driving somewhere one day, and we saw sort of a fairly looking new house out in the countryside, and Doak said, "Let's stop here." And the driver, our Chinese driver, said, "Oh no, you don't want to stop here." But we did, and it was a farmer who had just built a new house, and he invited us in, and he showed us this sewing machine down in the living room, and this 2-story house, and the garden in the back, and all of the new things that he had in his house. He was, very proud of where he had come in life.